Being a rapper doesn't come easy because not only do you have to rap about that life, you also have to be about that life. This means you will be visiting the courtroom very often, and sometimes shit can get serious.
And his song about running from crime made him known, but teenage rapper Tay will not be able to run from a now 55-year prison sentence.
When facing a life sentence, rappers have two choices. You either take your chances in court, or you can snitch your way out.
Yes, I snitched, and I did it proudly, right?
Thankfully though, the rappers in this video aren't 6ix9ine, so here are rappers who beat life sentences without snitching, of course. If you looked up the word murder in the dictionary, then you'd probably see King Von's name right next to it. Before meeting his end in November 2020, he openly rapped about how he could get anybody taken out without facing repercussions. And as messed up as this sounds, he was speaking from experience. Before becoming a hitmaker, the Oblak Demon was a street-certified assassin who could take you out for something as little as looking at him the wrong way, and in May 2014, this would be on full display. On one afternoon in Chicago, a party was taking place, and since he had nothing better to do, King Von decided to attend. But while he was there, he noticed something was off. He spotted two members from a rival gang, and King Von, being King Von, he wasn't about to let that slide. But after realizing what was about to go down, the mother of the person whose birthday it was told King Von not to start any trouble in her home. Surprisingly, Von listened and he told her that he would be doing no such thing. And a few minutes later, he left the party entirely. At first, it looked like King Von followed the woman's orders, but in reality, he was just planning his next move. As soon as he left, King Von went out looking for an associate of his by the name Big Mike because he was ready to start some trouble. But since King Von was still a human, he called one of the people who was still at the party, telling him that he was on his way back, so he better get all the kids in the house. And a few minutes after this call, King Von and his friend drove back to the house and they opened fire on three men who were outside. The three men would try and run, but Von allegedly chased them down as he shot at them while yelling, "Why are you running?" Now that's some serious savagery right there. Two out of the three men would survive, with the only casualty being a man named Malcolm Stuckey. He was pronounced dead on scene after suffering a bullet to the head. While his death was already a tragedy, what made it even worse is that he wasn't the intended target. King Von was aiming for the two men who he saw at the party earlier, but Malcolm Stuckey just so happened to get caught in the crossfire. After the murder, the people of Chicago were outraged because an innocent man who had nothing to do with gangs had lost his life to gun violence. So after the cries of the community, the police knew that they had to find whosoever was responsible for this brazen hit. And they did. 2 months after the shooting, King Von would be pictured on his prom night toting a gun. Even if it was in a suit, he still wanted people to know that he couldn't be touched. That's why hours after this, he decided to put his gun to good use by getting involved in a shooting. Witnesses noticed what he was wearing, so it was easy to give a description to the police. I mean, he did look like he was about to star in a Michael Jackson video after all. So with the description they got from the witnesses, King Von would be arrested on gun charges that same night. And this was the beginning of the end for Von, because the very next month his good friend Big Mike was arrested and charged with the killing of Malcolm Stuckey. Then 48 hours after that, while he was still in prison, King Von would also be charged for killing Malcolm Stuckey. And just for the hell of it, he also got 2 counts of attempted murder for the other 2 guys he chased down. The road to trial would be very long for King Von, as he remained in prison from June 2014 all the way to December 2017. But during his time locked up, he oddly seemed very happy in prison. In fact, judging by the videos his friends captured, he looked right at home. For King Von, prison was like another day in the office because he was constantly getting into fights with rival gang members.
Von had over 20 fights in that. He was. He talk about jail. He talk about that like it's a rite of passage. Like every was a street like him. He was like jail was coming. Well, shorty sliding up on like the police don't even exist. He just smoke you broad day.
And in one incident, he seemingly participated in starting a prison fire. But while it was all fun and games on the inside, it wasn't the same on the streets, as during his time locked up, King Von would be given devastating news. On Valentine's Day 2017, his best friend T-Roy was gunned down, and Von openly spoke about how this death affected him.
They killed my dog, I was locked up. Killed me, I broke down, I ain't crashed so long. But every day, this my I'm in jail, I'm fighting the murder and I call it every day. This on like Valentine's Day, you see what I'm saying? I call my mama back. Now she crying and shit. Ma, what the f you crying for? You good? She, ooh, they shot T-Roy. T-Roy got, oh, what? Ooh, what? Oh, look at the phone. You know how that shit go, you in jail, you can tell, hold on.
What made the death hurt so much more was that King Von was locked up, so he couldn't offer condolences to the family, let alone even be there for the funeral. But that was seemingly all about to change, because a few months after his friend's death, it was finally time for Von to face the music, as in November 2017, Von made his first court appearance. But things were seemingly about to take a turn for the worst, because after being approached for a deal, King Von's accomplice Big Mike promised the prosecution that he would cooperate. He told the prosecutors that he was willing to testify against King Von, since he only shot one guy in the foot, while King Von was the man that pulled the trigger on Malcolm Stuckey. With his friend's testimony, it looked like King Von was guaranteed to serve time for murder. But before that could happen, shockingly, Big Mike decided to back out of the deal. And without his testimony, convicting King Von became a huge problem. And as if Big Mike going back on his word wasn't enough, multiple witnesses failed to testify against Von, possibly out of fear for their lives, because there was speculation that one of the witnesses had been gunned down. And Von even alluded to this on his song 2 AM.
When the witness ain't there, it won't stick. Boom. When the witness ain't there, it won't stick. Boom.
With no witnesses, the prosecution had a weak case. Therefore, King Von had to be acquitted, meaning after 3 years, he was a free man. King Von had officially gotten away with murder. But the same could not be said for Big Mike, as he was sentenced to 16 years for the murder of Malcolm Stuckey. Plus, as punishment, he got 12 more years for backing out of his deal with the prosecution. While Mike served his sentence, King Von would go on and become a successful rapper while his friend paid for his sins in prison. 9 years after being convicted, Big Mike was finally released. And to this very day, he claims that the only thing that got him in trouble that day was King Von's pride.
In that situation, everybody can walk away, you feel me? It's always about pride when you a street nigga. Because I don't want you to go back and tell nobody that you me at a party. You hold me at a party. You had me nervous to the point where you made me leave. I don't want you walking around talking about that, because it's going to get everywhere.
During his interview, he also opened up about how Malcolm Stuckey's death was a big mistake that shouldn't have happened in the first place.
The most hardened killer's gonna have some type of heart. Dude was an innocent bystander. He ain't had shit to do with none of that shit that was going on. He was just one of them niggas that used to come around. He had a job. He was going to school and everything. You know what I'm saying? He was just one of them niggas that used to come around. And shit, he got caught up in some shit that ain't had nothing to do with him.
As sad as it sounds, this wasn't the only murder King Von got away with. As in 2020, members of the O-Block gang were arrested on a RICO charge for the killing of rapper FBG Duck. All 5 men were found guilty, but according to the FBI, it should have been 6 men, as before his death, King Von was speculated to have been the man who paid for the hit, meaning he was the mastermind. But he was never punished for his sins because he didn't live long enough to make it to court, meaning King Von dodged the life sentence by losing his own life. But while King Von didn't live long enough to enjoy his freedom, the same could not be said for Young Thug, because he went from facing 110 years in jail to being a free man all of a sudden.
Rapper Young Thug will appear in court this morning. The rapper, whose real name is Jeffrey Williams Jr., was arrested Monday on a 56-count racketeering indictment.
That indictment alleges his YSL record label is a criminal street gang that has committed murder, assault, and threats of violence.
On May the 9th, 2022, Young Thug and 27 others were brought in on RICO charges. He was accused of orchestrating a racketeering conspiracy that involved murders, attempted murders, and armed robberies. The RICO case came out of nowhere, so people wondered what on earth sparked it. Well, it all began when Kenneth Copeland, Kenneth Copeland, aka Lil Woody, was robbed by people affiliated to the rapper YFN Lucci, who is a well-known enemy of Young Thug. After the robbery, Lil Woody was seeking retaliation, so he asked Young Thug for some help. So Thug allegedly rented out a car for Lil Woody to get his payback. And not long after that, outside a barbershop in Castleberry Hill, a man named Donovan Thomas Jr., aka Big Nut, was gunned down in a drive-by shooting with the same car Young Thug allegedly rented out. Nut was a close friend of YFN Lucci, so it was obvious that the hit was retaliation for Woody's robbery. Big Nut's death. Did I just say Big Nuts? Anyway, Nutt's death caused chaos in Atlanta, as both YSL and YFN were gunning for blood. That's why during this war, multiple bodies would drop. And the police knew that the killings eventually had to end, but the only way to do that was to put everyone involved behind bars. So the police pulled up their socks and they got straight to it. On May the 4th, 2021, YFN Lukey and 11 others were arrested on RICO charges for several gang-related crimes, which he later pleaded guilty to. With YFN Lukey behind bars, half of the problem was solved. Now the only person the police needed to get was Young Thug. Finding evidence to convict Young Thug was gonna be very hard, but luckily for the police, they didn't need any dirt on Thug. All they needed was to catch somebody around him so that they could at least find someone who was willing to become their snitch for less jail time. And lucky for them, in October 2021, they found one. Lil Woody was arrested for possessing a firearm, and since he was a convicted felon, he was looking at 10 to 15 years in prison if he was found guilty. But the prosecution was willing to go easy on Woody only if he was willing to help them. In order to kill the snake, you need to chop off its head. So the district attorney offered Lil Woody a deal in exchange for him giving up Young Thug. Woody accepted the deal, leading to the whole RICO case getting started in the first place. Young Thug's trial was not going to be easy because he was arrested in May 2022, but it took 8 months for a jury to be picked, causing the trial to only start later in January 2024. Even before Thug's case began, it was not looking good for him, as multiple members didn't want to go to court, so they opted to get plea deals instead. One of those men being Gunna, Young Thug's good friend. Gunna received a plea deal where he maintained his innocence but admitted that the prosecution's evidence was strong enough to convict him. While the plea deal was great for Gunna, the same could not be said for Young Thug, as Gunna openly told the court that his leader's record label was actually a front for a gang.
YSL is a music label and a gang, and you have personal knowledge that members or associates of YSL have committed crimes in furtherance of the gang.
Yes, ma'am.
Gunna's testimony did hurt Young Thug, but lucky for him, he was about to receive a silver lining in the form of Lil Woody. Yes, the same person who got him in this mess was about to get him out of it. Since Woody was the one who originally got the whole case rolling, the prosecution was going to use him as the star witness, but that all backfired on them when he failed to snitch on Young Thug. Instead of putting Thug away, he was actually helping him beat the case. When the prosecution asked him questions, he answered in a very vague manner. For example, when he was asked how old he was, he failed to give an answer. With Woody's lack of cooperation, it seemed like freedom was around the corner, but sadly, due to some courtroom corruption, Thug was in for a wild ride. The judge presiding over the case and the prosecution had a secret meeting with Lil Woody, telling him that if he doesn't go on the stand and repeat everything he told the prosecution when he was first brought in, he would be going to jail. The secret meeting was against the rules since Young Thug's counsel was not informed or involved. And in court, there should be transparency between the defense and the prosecution. So since the meeting clearly went against that, Thug's lawyer Brian Steele confronted the judge about it. But in return, he got arrested.
All right. Take Mr. Steele in the custody, please.
After the courtroom was turned into a circus, it was clear the adults needed to step in immediately. That's why the Georgia Supreme Court would bring Brian back into court, and the judge presiding over the case was forced to recuse himself. With the new judge on trial, things were finally looking up for Young Thug because she was actually a good judge. Other than the fact that she once said the N-word in court, though.
Right. Boy, you still drinking? Where you at? I gotta do it for boo. These niggas lacking.
Yeah, that was not her finest moment. Even if he was found guilty because of all the backstage politics with the previous judge, Young Thug was simply going to file a mistrial. The prosecution knew that their case had completely fallen apart, so they offered Jeffrey a plea deal.
I take full responsibility for, my crimes or my charges. I want to say sorry to my family, my mom, my managers, my kids is not here. Really, everybody that got something to do with this situation, I want to say sorry for just like me.
Young Thug would accept the plea deal and he would eventually be sentenced to 40 years. While it sounds like too much, it actually isn't, because he was only permitted to serve 5 years in prison, which was commuted to time served, meaning the 2 years that he had already spent in prison covered his entire jail sentence. He was then given 15 years of probation and 20 years backloaded, meaning he was only going to serve the 20 years if he violated any of his parole conditions. The conditions were that he is banned from Atlanta for the first 10 years of his probation, He is only permitted to return on conditions such as weddings and funerals. He was also prohibited from possessing firearms and displaying any gang signs. And finally, he's also been barred from coming into contact with any gang members. While it sounds like a lot, it really isn't, because if Young Thug stays on his best behavior, he will remain a free man. And even if he can't go back to his city, that still beats 720 years in prison. So this was definitely a win. But while Young Thug's freedom came with some conditions, the same could not be said for A$AP Rocky, because he got off scot-free. In October 2021, A$AP Josh, a member of the A$AP mob, passed away. After his passing, his family and the A$AP crew gathered around to raise money for the funeral. But as much as they tried to chip in, the money was never going to be enough to give him a dignified send-off. That's why the group reached out to A$AP Rocky, asking him for help. Rocky agreed, and he said that he will be providing money for the funeral, or so we thought, because when the time came, Rocky didn't contribute a single penny. At least, that's according to A$AP Rally. Rally was one of the crew members who asked Rocky to contribute money, but according to him, he didn't lift a finger. But Rally was wrong. Rocky did stand by his word and he did provide money for the funeral, but since Rally didn't know that, he decided to attack A$AP Rocky. They had a heated argument over the phone when A$AP Rally called out Rocky for being selfish, and apparently Rocky didn't have nice words to say either. Because he didn't want their conversation to end on their phone, Rocky asked Rally if they could meet in person. Rally felt threatened by Rocky's tone, so he decided to meet him at a hotel separate from the one he was staying at. Rally would eventually arrive to the spot on his own, while Rocky was accompanied by two A$AP members. As soon as the two met, things got heated very quickly as they started getting physical with each other. And according to the security tapes, Rally was the one who raised his hands first, and that's when Rocky responded back. The two A$AP members who accompanied Rocky tried to break up the fight, but that's when things got ugly and Rocky allegedly reached for his waistband and pulled out his loaded firearm. Initially, Rocky didn't do anything with the gun, but that was until Rally called him a pussy.
He pointed at me, and then that's when Elijah was like in between, and he's like, I'll kill you right now, pussy, or like whatever, like just was, and then I'm right behind Elijah, and I'm saying, if you brought a gun, use it then. Like, the fuck you brought a gun for, pussy?
Allegedly, Rocky could not take the disrespect, so he decided to start firing shots. Luckily though, no one got hurt other than Rally, who received a tiny bruise to his knuckles. After that night, the incident was long forgotten by the group as they all went their separate ways. They did all try to forget about the situation, but that was all until April 2022 when the past came knocking on their doors, specifically Rocky's one. After he had just returned from Barbados with his wife Rihanna, he was met by the police at LAX. Rocky was arrested for his involvement in the November 2021 shooting. His bail was set at $550,000, but since he is A$AP Rocky plus is married to a literal billionaire, he was able to pay it that same afternoon. Like the other cases in this video, the trial did not start immediately, as A$AP Rocky had to wait for nearly 2 years to finally get his day in court. And with the threat of facing 24 years in prison, Rocky needed to lawyer up with only the best. So he hired criminal lawyer Joe Tacopina. His lawyer Joe has worked on many high-profile cases, and he has defended everybody from the likes of Meek Mill to even Donald Trump. So he was exactly what Rocky needed. Once the trial finally began, everybody started sharing their accounts, but the stories became very infrequent. Because while the story was that Rocky fired several shots, the police failed to find any bullet casings at the scene of the crime. And the only time they did get casings was when A$AP Rally hand-delivered them to the police station, which was quite suspicious since if the police couldn't find anything, how on earth did he find the casings? He might as well have planted them there. The weapon in question was also something the court lacked, as while they did raid Rocky's house, all the weapons they found were registered, and it was highly unlikely that they were the weapons used in the shooting. Plus, Rally's testimony wasn't helping the case either, as the jury saw him as a jealous friend who was just mad because he couldn't get any money. With their case falling apart, the prosecution knew that they had to offer Rocky a plea deal.
A$AP Rocky turned down a final prosecution plea offer of 180 days in jail if he would plead guilty to one of his 2 felony counts.
Rocky refused the plea deal, as he said he was willing to take his chances in court, and at first he was called a fool for doing this.
People of the state of California versus Joaquin Mayers. The jury in the above entitled action find the defendant not guilty.
Rocky's case would be dismissed entirely and he was acquitted of all charges. And after becoming a completely free man, Rocky had no one to thank but God.
God first. You gotta thank God first, you know what I'm saying? And I really want to thank the jury for making the right decision, you know? And I'm just so thankful. This is crazy right now. This whole experience has been crazy for the past 4 years, but I'm thankful. Nonetheless, I'm thankful, and we're blessed to be here right now, to be a free man talking to y'all. Thank you. All praise to God.
Congratulations. The men in this video are perfect examples of how the justice system has many loopholes that can easily be exploited. But for many, these loopholes aren't always there, as while some rappers get away with it, most of them don't. For instance, CK is serving a 55-year sentence where he didn't even pull the trigger. And as for Lil Durk, he might be facing the death penalty all because he tried to get revenge for the first man on our list. And speaking of King Von, did you know that his killer also got away with murder? Yeah, and he isn't the only one. So did Snoop Dogg. But that's a story for another day, so comment down below if you'd like to see a part 2.